There's a letter written in 1774 that changed the course of human history. The man who wrote it would become the second president of the United States. But on this day, July 6th, 1774, John Adams was just a tired traveler, about to make a choice that would echo through generations. He was exhausted, 35 miles on horseback. When he arrived at Mrs. Houston's house, he asked her a simple question. "Madam, is it lawful for a weary traveler to refresh himself with a dish of tea, provided it has been honestly smuggled or paid no duties?" Her response would help ignite a revolution. "No, sir, we have renounced all tea in this place. I can't make tea, but I'll make you coffee." Adams continued in his letter to his wife Abigail. "Accordingly, I have drank coffee every afternoon since, and have borne it very well. Tea must be universally renounced. I must be weaned, and the sooner the better. But here's what you don't know. This wasn't just about tea. This wasn't just about America. This single beverage, this dark, bitter brew, had already toppled sultans, funded slave empires, sparked revolutions across 3 continents, and would go on to reshape human consciousness itself. By the end of this video, you'll discover the secret letter that Napoleon screamed about in defeat. The shocking reason a sultan executed coffee drinkers with a 100-pound broadsword. And the dark truth about how the coffee in your cup this morning is connected to the bloodiest revolution the Western Hemisphere has ever seen. Our story begins not in a palace, not in a battlefield, but in the mountains of Ethiopia over 1,000 years ago. Legend speaks of a goat herd named Kaldi. His goats were acting strange, dancing, full of energy after eating mysterious red berries. Curious, Kaldi tried them himself. The sensation was electric. He brought the berries to a nearby monastery. The monks were horrified. They started saying that this is the devil's work. They cast the berries into the flames. But then, something unexpected happened. An aroma, unlike anything they'd ever experienced, filled the monastery. One monk, overcome with curiosity, pulled the embers from the fire, poured hot water over them, and took a sip. The world would never be the same. By the 1400s, coffee had spread to Yemen. By the 1500s, it reached the Ottoman Empire. And there, in the coffee houses of Istanbul, something dangerous began to brew. By 1600, there were 600 coffee houses in Istanbul alone. And here's why that terrified those in power. For the first time in human history, social barriers were crumbling. Rich and poor, educated and illiterate, soldiers and scholars, all sitting at the same table, all equal under the steam of coffee. The illiterate could learn from the educated. Members of the royal court could discuss politics with the Sultan's own elite infantry, the Janissaries. And that's when Sultan Murad IV made his decision. You see, Murad's brother and uncle had been assassinated by Janissaries, soldiers who gathered in coffee houses. In 1633, Murad issued a decree. Drinking coffee was now a capital offense, punishable by death. But Murad didn't just make a law, he became obsessed. Historical accounts tell us he would disguise himself as a commoner and prowl the streets of Istanbul at night, wielding a 100-pound broadsword. When he found coffee drinkers, he decapitated them on the spot. Think about that. A sultan so terrified of people thinking, of people gathering, of people talking, that he personally executed them. But here's the question you need to ask. Why? What was happening in those coffee houses that was so dangerous? The answer? He believed that coffee houses might evolve into hubs of radical ideas and unrest. Fast forward to 1652, London. Pasqua Rosé opens the first coffee house in England. For 1 penny, any man could enter. 1 penny bought you coffee and something far more valuable, access. British culture was intensely hierarchical and structured. The idea that you could go and sit next to someone as an equal was radical. These weren't just coffee houses, They were information exchanges, news factories. Within decades, they were called penny universities. Lloyd's of London, the insurance giant, started in a coffee house. The London Stock Exchange, coffee house. The East India Company, one of the most powerful corporations in human history. Guess what? Coffee house. But not everyone was happy about this democratization of ideas. King Charles II's father had been beheaded during the English Civil War. Charles was paranoid. He knew revolutions started with conversations. And where were people having conversations? On June 12, 1672, Charles issued a proclamation to restrain the spreading of false news and licentious talking of matters of state and government. He dispatched spies, infiltrators, to sit in coffee houses and listen. But the king failed. You cannot stop ideas once they begin to spread. And nowhere did ideas spread faster than in the coffee houses of Paris. The Café Procope. Voltaire sat here, Rousseau, Diderot, the greatest minds of the Enlightenment, all fueled by coffee. They wrote pamphlets. They debated philosophy. They questioned everything, monarchy, religion, social hierarchy. And then, July 12, 1789, a young lawyer named Camille Desmoulins stands on a table at the Café de Foix in the Palais Royal. To arms, citizens, to arms. 2 days later, the Bastille falls. The French Revolution, one of the most important political events in human history, was called to action in a coffee house. But let's go back to America, back to that letter. John Adams wrote about coffee in 1774, but he wasn't the first American revolutionary to sit in a coffee house. The Green Dragon Tavern in Boston, built in 1701. Daniel Webster would later call it the headquarters of the Revolution. In its basement, the Sons of Liberty met in secret. Paul Revere was there, Samuel Adams, Joseph Warren. And there, over cups of coffee and ale, they planned something audacious. December 16, 1773. Dressed as Mohawk Indians, they boarded British ships and threw $18,000 worth of tea into Boston Harbor. Nearly $1 million in today's money. Now here's where the letter becomes crucial. 6 months after the Boston Tea Party, John Adams writes to Abigail. He's traveling, he's tired, and he's making a choice. When Mrs. Houston tells him she won't serve tea, only coffee, Adams doesn't argue. He embraces it. This wasn't just about preference. This was identity. To drink coffee was to be a patriot. To drink tea was to be loyal to the crown. Even Benjamin Franklin in London at the Smyrna Coffee House wrote his Open Letter to Lord North, a scathing satire of British rule over coffee. And when the Declaration of Independence was drafted, an early reading took place on the steps of the Merchant Coffee House in Philadelphia. Coffee wasn't just at the American Revolution. Coffee was the soul of the American Revolution. But now, we need to talk about the truth you won't see in Starbucks ads, because while coffee was inspiring freedom in Europe and America, it was building something else entirely in the colonies, an empire built on chains. By the 18th century, the British, French, Spanish, Portuguese, and Dutch had all realized something. Coffee was gold, and they controlled the colonies where it could grow. They established plantations across Indonesia, Latin America, and the Caribbean. And they needed labor, cheap labor, expendable labor. The irony is almost unbearable. The same coffee that fueled conversations about liberty and equality in Parisian cafés and American coffee houses was being harvested by enslaved human beings who had no liberty, no equality. And nowhere was this more brutal than in Saint-Domingue, modern-day Haiti. By the late 1700s, this single French colony produced 2/3 of the world's coffee. The wealth was unimaginable, the suffering was unspeakable. And then the day came, August 1791. The enslaved people of Haiti said, "Enough." What followed was the largest and most successful slave rebellion in human history. Plantations burned, masters were killed, And after years of brutal warfare, led by the brilliant General Toussaint Louverture, Haiti won its independence. Napoleon Bonaparte sent 43,000 French troops to reclaim the colony. They failed. When Napoleon learned in 1803 that his forces had been defeated, that Haiti was lost, that his coffee empire had collapsed, he reportedly screamed, "Damn coffee, damn colonies." Think about that. Napoleon Bonaparte, one of the greatest military minds in history, defeated by people fighting for their freedom, fighting against a system built on coffee. But the story doesn't end there. With Haiti's production destroyed, the Portuguese saw an opportunity. They ramped up coffee production in Brazil, and they did it with even more enslaved labor. Over 4 million enslaved people are brought to Brazil, who was now the largest destination of enslaved Africans in the New World. Brazil didn't abolish slavery until 1888. By 1900, Brazil produced more than 2/3 of the world's coffee. Built on the backs of enslaved and formerly enslaved people. Your morning coffee? This is where it comes from. This is the legacy. And it didn't stop there. During the Industrial Revolution, factory owners discovered something valuable about coffee. It kept workers awake. It kept them focused. It allowed them to work longer hours, to synchronize their bodies to clock time, instead of natural sunlight cycles. Instead of 5 meal breaks a day, workers could survive on coffee breaks. Sound familiar? Coffee didn't just build empires, it sustained them, it fueled them, and it came at a cost most of us never think about. But there's another side to this story, because coffee also did something remarkable. Remember John Adams, that letter he wrote in 1774? Adams was a prolific correspondent. He and Abigail exchanged over 1,000 letters during their lifetime, and many of those letters, discussing revolution, philosophy, governance, human rights, were written in coffee houses or over cups of coffee. In 1775, Adams wrote to James Warren, "The debates and deliberations in Congress are impenetrable secrets, but the conversations in the city and the chat of the coffee house are free and open." Adams understood. The coffee house was where real political power lived, not in the halls of government, but in the conversations between citizens, and those conversations led to organization. The committees of correspondence, the revolutionary networks that coordinated resistance across the colonies. They met in coffee houses. The Committee of 51 in New York organized at the Wall Street Coffee House. Later, that same building would become the New York Stock Exchange. Thomas Jefferson called coffee the favorite drink of the civilized world, and the tradition continued. During the Spring of Nations in 1848, when revolutionary movements swept across Europe, Viennese coffee houses became command centers for students and liberals fighting for constitutional reforms. In the 20th century, the cafés of Paris hosted Hemingway, F. Scott Fitzgerald, Gertrude Stein. Later, Simone de Beauvoir and Jean-Paul Sartre developed existentialist philosophy while drinking coffee at Café de Flore. Today, coffee shops are everywhere, on every corner, in every city, and if you pay attention, you'll notice something. The same things are happening today that happened in 1550 Istanbul, in 1770 Boston, in 1789 Paris. Ideas are being shared, businesses are being planned, movements are being organized. Maybe the next great revolution is being planned right now in a coffee shop near you. So let's come back to where we started. That letter, July 6, 1774. When Mrs. Houston told John Adams she wouldn't serve him tea, she was making a political statement. When Adams wrote to Abigail that he would bear it very well and that tea must be universally renounced, he wasn't just talking about a beverage. He was talking about identity, about allegiance, about freedom. Every cup of coffee you drink connects you to this history, the good and the bad, the liberation and the oppression, the conversations and the conflicts. When you sit in a coffee shop today, you're participating in a tradition that's over 500 years old. A tradition that has toppled sultans and sparked revolutions. A tradition that has built empires and destroyed them. You're sitting in a space that, at its best, is egalitarian, where anyone can come, where anyone can belong, where ideas flow as freely as the coffee, and maybe, just maybe, you're writing or reading or saying something that will matter, something that will echo through time, like John Adams' letter to Abigail. Because history isn't made in palaces or parliaments alone. History is made in the quiet conversations over coffee. History is made when people gather and think and question and dream. History is made one cup at a time.